together, perhaps is even more even more important in these times. So, of course, it is my absolute and utter pleasure to be not just the publisher of this wonderful book, but to be here today to talk to an author who is very, very dear to us, because she pulled off the most unbelievable feat at a time when most people were complaining of lack of productivity or exhaustion or PTSD almost. And it's not like Ita did not have. I mean, it was not an emotionally exhausting time or a trying time for her. It was for her like it was for all of us. But I think she committed herself to this project, and completed it. What is really amazing is that she completed it, or she carried it through. um, and having been part of the making, I know I can say this absolutely with utter sincerity and honesty. With great, she saw it through with great sincerity to the moment. I think, her insistence that we call it a graphic recollection. Of course, this was a question I wanted to put to her, but I think she can talk to us about that later. Of course, the process is something that she is best to talk about. But I think the whole point of calling it a graphic recollection was this, because she knew that a lot of the research, a lot of the interviews, a lot of the making happened after our doors had been shut, in a sense, because of the lockdown. And yet we knew how resonant that moment had been for us. And those of us who'd been there at the protest site, those of us who had soaked it in, who had been changed forever by it. Anita being one of them, who sat there and actually was sketching. I mean, the first time we spoke about it was actually at the site. And I knew that she was. I mean, it would have been really serendipitous if I had come upon her sketching. It didn't quite happen in such a filmy way. But I went back home from the protest one day, and on Instagram, I saw one of her sketches. And the next time I was there, I looked for her. And I said, Ita, man, you're doing this, and it was just so exciting. It was sort of kind of a documentary or a documentation or a kind of a recording of the event as it was happening, but in a very, very deeply emotive manner, which of course now those of you who have got hold of the book, you have seen. So I want to start, Ita, um, with a follow on from this particular thing that I'm talking about what that moment really meant for us, about meeting you there. And I wanted to first talk about the experience of Shaheen Bagh itself, what it what it was like for you, and you know what it did for you, which perhaps is life changing.
Right. Thanks. Thank you, Arpita, for the introduction, for taking us back into what it felt like a little bit to be at Shaheen Bagh. It was really nice. And thank you to everyone at Books Etc. for organizing this. It's really, as you were saying, Arpita, it's such a strange time to come together, but also so important to be able to do it in whatever way one can. And yeah, thank you to everyone who's also joined us today. So yeah, thinking about what it felt like to just go into when things were starting at Shaheen Bagh. Actually, I always keep going back to that, and I think even in the beginning of the book, making it meant thinking of those first days of going into the space of Shaheen Bagh and the protests. And I think. Actually, one has to start with what was happening at Jamia and when the police brutality happened on campus. And like many others, the first few days of going into the protest was at Jamia. And it was just overwhelming numbers of people from around who had gathered, and students from, not maybe living there, but who study at Jamia or who've been to Jamia. So just that kind of sense of everybody being out on the road and taking over the entire space with overwhelming crowds, it just felt like nobody's going to stay at home anymore. And one day, like I actually hadn't been into Shaheen Bagh before ever. I knew that it was there, but and Jamia, yes, but I hadn't been into Shaheen Bagh. So one day at the protest, I'd heard about this space that's there nearby where it's a women's run protest site. But and I wanted to, but I didn't geographically. I didn't know the space well enough. So it was a few people who were talking about it and were making their way into Shaheen Bagh, into the protest site, and I kind of just followed. And already, I mean, there were barricades, and it was in like just the third week of December. But so the protest had just started, and it was only a few, like 50 women or so gathered, but already there were barricades upon barricades. So one got off at a far distance from the protest and saw this kind of like small gathering of women in the distance. Absolutely, like, not like a huge protest with lots of banners and loudspeakers, a small gathering, and yet lots of police already there. So it was really strange actually to see so much happening around, and this far distance, this kind of conversation almost happening, intimate conversation. But once one entered that space from the very beginning, there was this feeling of this being radically different from any other protest site that one has been to, because it wasn't just about the protest. It was this taking over of public space, and that's so rare in Delhi that one feels this sense of women own public space, and this is in the middle of a huge highway. So not only is the highway and space transformed into this radical kind of women sitting in the middle of highways, shops are shut, there's also the space for democratic dialogue, which is otherwise kind of closed up in most spaces. So already, like from the very beginning, the inception of this transforming of space itself was really, really powerful. And then slowly, as I think that developed, just listening, just sitting there and listening to women up on stage speaking so sharply of not just like the laws and what that does to nationhood and citizenship and the larger identities of what it means to think of the future of a country, but its relationship to everyday life. And that's something that women Muslim women who are coming out of homes and might not have for many, many years or ever stood on stage and spoken so sharply were doing, because it was so urgent. It was something that's hit every home, and not just CEA, but police brutality, action against students, children, nieces, nephews. So this relationship of these grand structures to what's happening in your home is something that was there in Shaheen Bagh because it's a women's run space. So I think that I really like, it was really powerful to just be there in those first few days. And then, yeah, and then it grew from there and kept growing.
Yeah, and I mean, I was just thinking that in a lot of ways, so much of what we saw at the protest site, like you're saying, um, was a deeply gendered experience in a lot of ways. So the first time in a protest site in Delhi, wasn't it? Because a lot of us who have been to protests before, also very major protests, say in center of the city, like in Connaught Place, or sorry, in at the cul-de-sac near Jantar Mantar, or even India Gate, after the gang rape and the protests that followed. It, there was no, there's often no intimacy there, right? And here, I mean, as you're saying, it was like, it was like these concerns, a nationwide concern, kind of a pan India wide concern, being debated and discussed and aired, even as daily chores were being discussed, or there were this thing of how are we going to get through the protest on a day-to-day basis, or we need to provide food, or we need to make sure, since all families are here, we need to make sure that everybody has enough to eat. And it was unprecedented in a lot of ways, isn't it? And I was just thinking that there is an intimacy. I mean, everybody who blurbed your book and many people who are reviewing it now um, uh, have commented on it, right? That there is a sense of intimacy in this book. I remember Sarnath said that it's not just about these external processes, but it's something about the inner recesses of one's mind as one is experiencing the movement, whether there or whether through the book. So tell us a little bit about this aspect of intimacy, and was it alive in your mind as you were making the book?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a interesting question. There's so many thoughts around it, around what was happening, but also then the process of making. I think like the first, I would just think of it more in terms of the process of what it meant to be there and to draw and things like that. So in the first few days of being a Shaheen Bagh, it was still a much smaller group of women than what it became. And those, I really think about those, and that stayed with me a lot while actually working on the book. Those first few times of being there, and the sense of even just more open space, and sitting and yeah, having these conversations while there's maybe somebody speaking on stage and doing this kind of very sharp critical work of not just breaking down what CAA means, but also what the demands for a democratic tomorrow are. But then also while that's happening, having these conversations with somebody who's sitting there with her children, a lady sitting next to me, and then saying, you know, what have you been coming here from the beginning? What is it for you? Are you coming every day? And her saying, you know, wow, it's not just yes, it's hope, and yes, I'm coming here, but also how difficult it is that the shops are shut, and therefore I need to go much further away to get vegetables and supplies because Shaheen Bagh is closed down for protests, and so has surrounding areas. So this kind of reality. So I have to go in a rickshaw, go much further, come back, cook, and then yes, I come for protests every day. So all these, so these kind of things of yes, the conversation on stage, but also these little conversations happening while sitting there. Um, in the beginning days it was just drawing those because there was not that much media coverage at all in the beginning. There was much larger protests of, say, you know, the usual Jantar Mantar, India Gate, all of those, and the organizations that organize those, but not this space, you know. And so it was this urgency of doing things that are kind of calls to action almost. So sitting there, and it's also, I mean, yes, it is calls to action, making purpose, but it's also just the way that I engage with space. It's to draw. That's what one does. There's people who write. There's people, you know, there's various ways that people figure out what it is as a participant of a much larger movement. What is participating? And I think there's somebody's mic. Yeah. Yeah. So what is participation? How many things can participation mean? Right? It's not just, I'm not from Shaheen Bagh, and that I'm not trying to be suddenly, you know, take on that. That's not what being in the same space means. But what else can it mean? How many ways? How does a theater person kind of engage with that space? How does a musician? How does a poet? And that's what movements like this can do. What Shaheen Bagh did do is to unfold movements within movements, and voices, the democracy of many voices leading to many conversations. And so within that, and that's what I think the book also can be, is not a representation of a whole, but how do you bring together some of those conversations and weave those together. So from the beginning, it was kind of drawing bits of that, and in the beginning it was just putting those out, right? And those were more urgent. And then slowly it was this kind of feeling of, okay, so what would a longer process mean? And also that was organically was happening, longer actually conversations within the space. Actually, I can open out an image here that might be more interesting to just
Yeah, absolutely.
share. Yeah. Um, yeah, so this is, I don't know if Atya is maybe here. Yeah, Atya's
Yeah,
here.
Atya's here.
So
Atya's here.
nice. Yeah, maybe it'll be nice to even have Atya share at some point what it meant. But so yeah, so it was, so I was able to have some of these conversations while at Shaheen Bagh. One of them was with Atiya, which led to most of, I think, the character, the lead character in the story, and where it opens out is based on. So over time, so geographer city. So that meant longer conversations, and yeah, and that was, you know, entering this longer process and slightly different engagement.
Yeah, I think Atia is here, so actually it will be quite lovely if she has some questions for you, or if she comes on line, and I mean, if she talks a little at the end, be lovely. I was just thinking that there was, of course, your experience of sitting there and doing the work that you were doing at that point, and in a lot of ways, it was sort of soaking it in and then kind of processing it through your graphics, through your sketches at that time, which is what I saw on Instagram, which is what you were posting. Talk us through the bookmaking part of it, which happened after the lockdown. I mean, why were you adamant about, and why were we all wedded to the word recollection? And how that in itself was this really interesting process, given the kind of problems, given the kind of challenges that we were all working with.
Right. Yeah. So initially it was just drawing, while at the site and putting these posters out, as were other artists, which were really calls to action, weren't taking, it was drawing at the drawing and the very same day putting things out via social media, and those were one image each. And then towards, I think it was like early mid Feb, when I myself was really feeling like this kind of need to talk to people more and have those longer conversations, with some of which are happening, and bring together notes in a process that's not just that kind of one day and putting out in social media, which has its own relevance. It's not to say, that's irrelevant. I think all these mediums work in various ways. And at that same kind of time when I was feeling these, wanting to enter that longer process, you called Arpita, and so it was really nice to kind of have the sense of others involved in supporting and thinking that this is a process that could be communicative and has its space in carrying forward what a movement is, and the conversations that can overflow and emerge from a movement. So the process of making a book has a space in how do you
I
communicate what's
just
happening beyond
remind
in
us
time,
that
right?
dialogue, that ether thing is going on.
Ita, Dipti's daughter.
Yeah,
I don't have any link or any information about it.
Amir,
I
you'll have
can
to
do
mute
this.
everyone.
Right. Conversations that emerge from conversations. I suppose that's interesting about Zoom. Yeah, so it was around the same time that Arpita also called, and we had this kind of the sense of what a book can be. It was nice for me to hear from Arpita and the team about what they imagine there can be, because being in a movement that's still unfolding and ongoing, it's very hard to imagine documenting it. How can you even do it? How can you talk about um, bringing together, archiving something that hasn't ended, and that is very urgent still, and is going to be urgent tomorrow. I mean, there wasn't a sense of suddenly, the government repealing these acts. I mean, as much as one would like, I think the truth is that it's not going to suddenly happen. There's only more and more violence and oppression and crushing of voices, and the use of UAPA and things like that. And so it's not like suddenly things are going to change. So how do you bring together the work that is about something that's happening still? And therefore, I think this kind of idea of not trying to tell the story of an entire movement at all, that's not the intention, and maybe cannot be of a book. But to kind of remember and remain with some of those urgent questions and dialogues that came up, and allow for then the work that comes out of it, whether it's a book or there'll be many other ways that the remembering of a movement happens. I hope there are. How can those carry forward those conversations? Because we cannot, at in the kind of given time that we're in, when there's only this one single narrative that's being presented and all of media is controlled, it becomes, I think, the role of artists and creative practitioners to constantly poke and prod and find new ways of telling histories that will otherwise end in erasure. So that's where I kind of feel like the sense of conversation. And for me, I draw and write, and there's amazing photographs and videos and all kinds of things that came out of it. But for me, it's drawing and writing that I know. And for me, that has a magic that I feel can create worldviews, and also has this power to engage, because it doesn't give you whole pictures. Like even the image that's in front of you, or these images, they actually bring together only little bits. So it's bits of information, and that as a medium, it sort of allows for readers, viewers to fill in and bring in their own recollections, maybe, or if they weren't in the space. They've often, I think everybody almost would have heard of it, read about, talked to somebody about it. So it's entering a space where others also have their recollections, have participated at various levels, much more than I was also, There's many more activists and people who were there night on night from Shaheen Bagh and around. So does it become a kind of, a way that those conversations can find place and location when geographies are shut? And that's an interesting way that things have unfolded over time. We don't have the same space. So what happens in the absence of a space? Movements don't end. They find new location and find new ground.
Yeah, and I was, just thinking as you were talking that in some ways, therefore, it's like a collective document, isn't it? Because in using that word very strategically, recollection, like you said, it can potentially draw in absolutely anybody who happened to visit the protest and then wants to um, think through it or think through the book about it, think back to it. So much of that is important, though, isn't it? Because I remember being quite overwhelmed on the days when I used to go there. And I think a lot of the processing used to come later when I would come back. I remember this time when every time for instance, I took my children there, I felt doubly overwhelmed, because I was so focused on trying to see every expression on their faces, to see how they were receiving the space and what was happening around them. And and I think it was after we came back and talked about it that one really processed it. And in a lot of ways, I feel this book allows you to do that. And that makes me think about another thing, which is that um, do you think this is word and image? I mean, the combination of word and image. Do you think this really is, I mean, the most powerful, could also be the most subversive documentary genre? And do you think in the times that we live in, and we're seeing it every day, right? We're seeing it with the memes that are being circulated every day, and how they seem to strike a chord again and again and again. Um, Talk us through this kind of word and image interplay and what it means for political expression and comment.
Hmm. Yeah, that's true. I think it's a really interesting time to see the kind of. I mean, it's of course bleak in terms of what is happening with the grand narrative um, and voices of dissent, but there's this emergence of a number of people taking to whatever media they can, and going ahead with really strong expressions of creative work. And that tends to happen in these difficult times, and it's happening right now. I mean, one opens, it's just amazing to see the kind of comics and, yeah, as you're saying, memes, videos, poetry, music by young people, as well as older. It's across generations of artists really coming up with work right now. And I think as a medium, for me, it's also what one knows. And for me, it's like drawing and writing are two things that have always been close to my heart, and I've always been drawing and writing as a way of note making. And something that I feel drawing allows for is this act of doing, of making, lines, and meticulously just sitting with an image for hours on end, and and doing that act of tracing and penciling and shading. And that, as you were saying, one often came home from the overwhelming amount of conversations and Shaheen Bagh and processed. And in a way, it's this way of processing or through line making and mark making. And so at a very kind of material level and at the level of, constructing, it's a part of thinking. It's a way of thinking. And I think all creative practitioners would say, who's working around, documentary or bringing together things that are happening, are non-fiction, it becomes, you're not already, I mean, there is lots that happens every day, of listening to women speaking up on stage in Shaheen Bagh, there's all this information, but then you actually learn and think more around what was happening and realize things while doing. So, and also the research that goes into it. So, talking to more people, looking at more and more articles. There's 2 other books that came out during the process of making this, which was really kind of it was important to look at those, to read as much as possible, and then continue that kind of process between. So making a dialogue between research, between talking and drawing. It's this process itself is like a conversation that happens, between all these things. Yeah, and with all of you also, I think that Yoda, it was this process between us also, which was very collaborative, I feel, because it was kind of the short timeline that we were working with. It wasn't, a book that we there was this onus from the beginning, this idea that we want to bring it out soon. So yeah, so I think that was also an important kind of, maybe a different way than sometimes where one kind of take the authors working in isolation. This was a process where we were all sort of involved from the beginning, and that for me was important as well. Yeah.
Thanks for saying that, Ita. Actually, it was, I mean, I really want to say for my team, I mean, we were really invested and committed and also struggling, because what with everyone getting COVID one after the other and everything else. But I also want to say that, I mean, uh, I'm I'm very pleased at the end. I mean, since Ita's given me this opening, I also want to put it out there that I'm very pleased at the end. We did this as a standalone book on our standalone Yoda Press list. I mean, we have partnerships with bigger publishers, but they were understandably, because bigger publishers always have sort of bigger concerns, I suppose. They were understandably somewhat squeamish about working on this book with us. And so we had to do some jugaad. We had to, for instance, put out that pre-order call to raise money to pay the printer, for instance. And it was incredible. The response was just unbelievable, to the pre-order call, and we could actually pay the printer on delivery, which is incredible for a small independent publisher. So, but ultimately, I feel I'm really happy we did it on our own, because in a sense, it just stays true to the story that began with you and with the movement, that it was such an independent and crowdsourced and collective effort to the end. And now, of course, it's gone out to the world. Just on a lighter note, actually, one sort of more serious question, which I cannot ignore, which is that we were so honored to have Dr. Ghazala Jamil's foreword to the book. And you'd agree, right, that it, in so many ways, it set the tone in how the book was going to be received. I mean, in a lot of ways, I think it was very reassuring, right, when she sent us that forward, and it kind of got us ready to put the baby out, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I think having for me from the get-go, to have you guys, everybody at Yoda Press, to just kind of back the book so strongly was for me the possibility of thinking that this is something that I should feel like, I should be able to do without kind of doubting and constantly thinking that it's not possible to document a movement that's still ongoing and has so many voices that should come in, but one may not be able to bring in. And then having Ghazala bring the forward into the book was, I think it couldn't have happened. I wouldn't have been able to be okay with the book going ahead without that. it has to be there. It's very much a part of what the book is, and it builds the conversation with what it means to continue a movement beyond the closure of the physical space of Shaheen Bagh. It brings that alive, right? It's not saying, yeah, I mean, her forward also, it's not this kind of just documenting of history. It's about what it means today and what it's going to mean tomorrow. And there's been movements unfolding since then. And I hope that the book and, all that's going into it and conversations around it are part of this, are part of that sense of unfolding that's going to continue of voices of dissent and also mass movements.
Ita, before I let Amir give us some questions from the audience, which have come in from the audience or Sabha, one last note on a lighter question on a lighter note, which is, how was it to get that Joe Sacco endorsement?
Yeah, I think as a lot of comics makers in the country, we learn what to do with comics only from looking at comics. So reading, Joe Sacco's work is Marianne Satrapi's, these are the ways that one realized that this is what one wants to do. I mean, there's the first comics that I read and said, oh my God, this is possible. This is what drawing and writing coming together can be. And it was shaking to realize what one can do with form. To actually have Joe Sacco look at the early, not complete draft, even just while the book was almost complete, and come back with his note on it, which just supported the work, and what it's become it was I think something I'll always kind of remember and treasure very much.
Yeah, it was one hell of a moment, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Even for us, it really was. Okay, so Amir, Sabah, do we have some questions? Do you want to moderate, or do you want to? Should I run?
Chat box.
Okay, so
But before that, I must say, I mean, I did not know about this blue cycle thing. I mean, I'm sure it must have been one hell of a moment. So even listening to it, that you got a feedback, and it sounds so very exciting. So yes, there's a question in the chat box.
yeah, I'm just trying to. Okay, this is someone, Dr. Shah. As a sociologist, his comment is here. As a sociologist, I believe that any prolonged protest somehow becomes a close-knit life world where fellow protesters develop a sort of we feeling and start sharing their personal lives, even create humor, cut jokes when they're not actively protesting. There may be two reasons for it. One, Shaheen Bagh women found a space outside their four walls where they were confined to earlier, and two, conflict, or call it relaxing, protesting uh, fatigue. I query to the author if she caught any humor element. Sorry, I lost the question again when the presentation came on. Just give me a second to find it again. Oops.
Sorry, I removed that.
No, my query to the author is she got any humor element in their conversations? Did she observe their fatigue, finding their space to share their personal lives? Well, you comment on some of this in the book, isn't it? There are some bits. Anyway, I'll let you take that.
Yeah, I can go back to, I mean, I always think it's nice to just look at images actually. So yeah. So yeah, I mean, there's so many things, and thank you for the comment in question. I didn't catch the name, but uh, definitely this kind of feeling of there being much more of life happening at the space than just protest and demonstration and being up on stage. That is, I think, what everybody got to know of happening at Shaheen Bagh, and not just Shaheen Bagh, then many other protest sites as well. And then slowly the whole country, there were protest sites similarly being organized, women doing everyday chores, having everyday conversations, all the dadis of the movement sitting and knitting and making clothes and cooking, and then the Sikhs coming in from Punjab and also cooking these huge amounts of food for everyone. So yes, that's what I think the radical nature of it being so much more than protest, right? And I don't know. What do you think about fatigue, Arpita? I feel like, yes, there was this work of taking on democratic protests that people do, that people have been doing in the past few years, especially in the country, and one is seen. It's really hard, tiring, backbreaking work. Actually, I mean, the old women who are sitting at Shaheen Bagh night after night after night in the bitter cold. It's not just joyous. It's not just the music and songs and libraries and theater that happens and the sense of democracy and open dialogue. It's also really, really shattering work to do. It's a huge toll on people's health, and that and activists very much speak about that. So I don't think that there's any way that one can say it isn't taxing, and it isn't it's really hard work to do. Yeah. And I hope there are bits of these, as you were saying, Arpita, that come into the book.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to show some of those visuals? The, sl-
I have a few,
the
yeah.
tongue-in-cheek ones.
I actually have just put together a few. I'm not sure which ones,
Yeah,
just like,
yeah,
or I might
yeah.
not be able to open up. Yeah. There's also, yeah, then there's also just, so the book moves between images that are, as we've been talking, which are intimate, of conversations with one person, to like the sense of overwhelming numbers, and just goes between these. And also moments such as theater production by a women's group that's not just from Shaheen Bagh but is coming. Yeah. And then not just Shaheen Bagh but other sites, so Bangalore protests, Bihar.
I
Yeah, I think that's.
actually, sorry, if I may respond, I just saw Kadambari's question, and actually I wanted to respond to that bit of the earlier comment myself. I absolutely don't agree that they were completely confined to four walls. Uh, that's not true at all, as a matter of fact. Uh, I mean, they were in their homes, you know, and they also came from various places, various parts of that sort of South Delhi, Southeast Delhi, and other parts, further off parts. Um, but yeah, they found that shared space in the platform for sure. But Kadambari, we do have someone from Shaheen Bagh here. Sorry, that might be my child dropping something in the next room. We do have someone from Shaheen Bagh here, but I don't know if she is in a position to speak. I have sent her a message. Um, if she would like to speak, it really is up to her. So, oh yeah, Atya says, sure, excellent. Atya, do you want to say something? It's so good to have you here. So good to have you here.
Hello, hi everyone.
Lovely to see you, Atya.
Yeah, so I wanted to comment on the earlier thing itself. So, um, the thing that about like women being in their homes, I think yeah, there's a domestic vibe to most of the women here, but I think it's not like they're not connected. You know, like one of the ways that they are connected is sometimes they have these religious gatherings and like learning spaces. So some or the other way, at least in the modern time, everybody is connected to each other through some or the other medium. And so completely saying you're not disconnected, and it's actually like especially in today's times, you can have like two completely different views in the same house because of mobile phones being accessible to the kind of knowledge gateway you have. You don't मतलब पहले हम लोग को सुनने में मिलता था like sometimes our parents would say somebody who was there would have to sneak into the books or would have to sneak in books to get a read of something or the other, but nowadays everybody has like the entire globe on their hands. So definitely. um the other thing I think till date, like what impact it has now, I think earlier there was always this conversation that would happen among like the minorities that यार कुछ नहीं हो सकता मतलब like मतलब we just have to deal with it. Like, we just have to, just deal with it, and this is the way it will happen, and we just have to be submersive. But now I think people are very expressive about their own identity. Like, they're very strongly opinionated. हाँ भाई हम है से, we're Muslims, or we're Sikhs, or we're, we're some part of the other minority, and we need to be heard. We are citizens as much as equal as anybody else, and our troubles, our issues are as much relevant as yours. So you can't just put us off to the side. So that thing obviously has come into everybody's, like, the way everybody thinks, or the way everybody acts. So that especially in the youth, like, they're very vehement now. They're like, nahi, haan to hai, aise to hai. Matlab, if we wear the hijab, we do wear it. If we act in a certain way, if we need a namaz break, we do need a namaz break. Earlier, people would be very scared, like, my friends, my juniors, my colleagues, or so on and so forth. It's all about expressing your identity, and at the same time, I think living along with it. I think that's, like, it's the most beautiful way you can live along with it. Like, I've worked with Arpita's husband. Like, that's how I know her. So I remember I used to take namaz breaks every, like, 2 times a day, and it was never an issue in work or anything else. And it was such a beautiful, like, it was a beautiful thing. Like, really, I have high respect for that. So
Thanks, Atiya. I also just want to add that because I only saw the question right now from Kadambari, this idea that women were in just caught in four walls, absolutely not. And I mean, for me, one of the first conversations was with Atiya. And Atiya works down the same street as the protest was where her office was, and she's a designer and an architect, and would come to the protest after her day's work with colleagues and others who are working there. So yeah, I don't think that is something that one should even approach thinking of the movement with. But yeah, so it was many things. I mean, there was also women who might not have stepped onto stages and come out to public spaces before.
There's the little one who's
yes.
now part of Wonderful. Get them used to political conversations when they're young. I tell you, that's what
Yes.
I did with mine. Okay, sorry to
Yeah.
digress
I think
into
it's
that.
very important. I think growing up, otherwise people feel very shy, and then they feel like, if you don't like, they don't become people who speak up then and later in life, or they shy away. And even post protest, we've seen so many people backing out from supporting other people. That's, like, really sad. It's because, like, there's so many people in prisons and so many things going on. It's still, like, pretty stressful at the moment.
But for everyone who's now, it's like full disclosure, right, Ita? So if you find Sahana in the book, that's based on Atiya. So so that's who Atiya is in the book. I was wondering about any other questions. I can't really see.
Yes, there's one more.
Oh, right.
I
Sabha, do
was,
you want to read it out? I can't
yeah,
find it.
sure,
I don't know why.
sure. This is a question from Prasanna. It says, I was relieved to see the book. There was a sense of urgency that needs to be documented for too many realities of our times. Although it is said, I've also lost it. One second. Yeah. I've also lost the question. Sorry.
I can read it out.
Yeah,
I can
please,
see it.
Ita.
So, although it said that histories are erased, I don't believe that. There's always some traces that remain. In the long view, what would this book bring in terms of histories, even if all other records are lost or erased beyond the book? I do. Would you like to take that, Arpita? Because I mean, I have hopes for it entering other conversations. I don't think that it's, as I was saying, I think the intention was ever to tell complete histories or archive a movement. It's the act of the process of re-entering what certain dialogues and demands were. and continuing those two new conversations and the unfolding of new movements. So these links that one can form over time. Yeah, and yeah.
Yeah, I
I
think
think
the
perfect
important
description.
word for me really is a word histories in plural, because that is what thankfully we are living in the realm of histories in plural. Gone are the days of that there's just one way of receiving or documenting history. And I think the book remains very, very, as I said right in the beginning, it's very sincere, it's very honest to what it is sort of setting out to do, which is just by using the word recollection. The word recollection is not a tokenism on the cover. It's something that Ita stays true to, and she's committed to throughout the book. And I think that is why it will be received as such, and it will have that significance forever, I think, just by being in the graphic mode, of course. Um, I also see, yeah, so Sabah's been wonderful, and she shared the buy link, which is wonderful, Sabah, because I was going to say, I'm not going to promote Amazon here. So I'm very glad that you put the
This is
books, etc.
the book of the month. You know, we choose a couple of books, and this is such a fantastic book. It's the book of the month, and we are promoting the book as much as possible. I mean, it's an amazing documentation, great piece of art, a piece of history that needs to be told, and it has to be carried forward. So yes, this is we are trying to do our bit and trying to take the story that you guys have started to take it forward. That's a link that I've put in there. Please promote the book, promote the author, promote the movement, so that we all can be a part of it in whatever way possible.
Yeah. So I mean, essentially, you can buy it from a lot of places. But it's my job as an indie publisher to always say, please try and buy indie. If you can buy it off an independent bookstore platform, if you can go to your nearby bookstore, please do that instead of ordering it off Amazon, although of course it is available there. Yeah.
Yeah,
Any other?
these are the questions.
Yeah. Ita, I was wondering, I don't know, do you have any last sort of things that you want to leave us with? Do you want to talk a little bit about the reception, which has been pretty, I was expecting it, though I told you right from the beginning, didn't I? But it's still been pretty incredible.
And there's one
Yes.
more question, Arpita,
Yeah.
by Megha.
Oh, okay. It's just come, yeah.
I personally
Um,
believe my own voices concept. In that light, would it have been better to have this documented by someone who lived reality, is directly affected by the protest and the movement? I'm sorry, this is in no way. The moment I scroll it down, I lose it.
she
Uh,
says,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, this is in no way discrediting the author and the efforts they've spent in documenting it. No offense meant to anyone, would love some clarity. If I may take this, Ita, will you allow me to take this?
okay.
Because I do believe that this is meant for me, and I know you will play yourself down and run yourself down. Um, Megha, actually, the answer is in your what you've put in parentheses, because it was Ita who was sitting there and sketching, right? It could not have developed in a more organic manner. It was literally Ita sitting there and sketching, and there might have been one or two other people doing it, but who continued to do it and who continued to build the narrative. And she did the work, as it were. It's not about me as a publisher or us as a publisher going out and telling her, can you do the work? It had begun. The process had begun. She had committed to it and she'd started it. And and she was very, very cognizant of the fact that that she had to tell the story in the most responsible manner, accountable manner possible. And I think her conversations with Atia first, and Atia being here, I think is a major, major sort of vindication of the way Ita went about her work for the book, and everybody else who's in the book, who has spoken in the book. I think she was extremely sort of committed to making sure that those voices stood for themselves and came through loud and clear. Atya, would you agree with me?
Yeah. Just wanted to add that I remember Ida came to me like I think when the lockdown start, just before it started, like it was February around that time. She came up to me with a list of type of like different people that she wanted to interview, and I can assure you she's been very much true to the spirit. Like whatever we told her, whatever like everything, she's been very true to it. So one thing is that, and then she had like a array of people. Like she interviewed, she wanted to get a hold of one of the dadis, she wanted to get hold of the middle-aged woman, she wanted to get hold of the the institution bodies, like somebody who's working for an NGO and so on and so forth. And so it was like she was covering up all realms, and I don't think she could have been like somebody. It was more than just our own voices. It was just not one person, it was like multiple own voices.
There are some more questions. I don't know. Yeah, there's one more question. Should I read it out, Ita? It says you must have gone through so many emotions every time you visited, joined the movement. Was there a predominant emotion, one that spurred you to document it in the way you have?
Um, no, I don't think that I can kind of trace back to this kind of one emotion that dominated, but it was, I think, this sense of really more than emotion, really also wanting to continuously just learn more of what's happening and from people, and talking and having those conversations and being able to engage with what democratic dialogues means at this point. In many ways that's happening in Shaheen Bagh, being able to continue that. And yeah, and I also feel like this, I mean, I'm going back, I'm still thinking about, the question of who documents and how one does it. And I think this question was really very much with me of who can document a movement. I think that's a conversation I've had often with Arpita and the Yoda Press team. And in a way, it's good. I feel like that conversation should be there, because then it urges you to constantly be ethical and be learning. I don't think there's ever a complete, a way of telling stories entirely, but one has to push oneself to have that onus and have that ethics around one. And also, one that's what the work of journalists always is. I mean, it shouldn't be also that people who are running protests and running movements have the onus on them to document it also. That should be also then the work of others, right? It's not just one person who's, and 100 people who are then coming out and protesting, who then have to also tell their story and keep pushing it out. We also, I mean, everybody has to join it in whatever way you can. And so it's a complicated question, and it doesn't end. I don't want to close the question, but these are ways that I thought about it. Yeah, that's all.
So back to you, Sabha, because I think it's time.
I mean, and it's nice too that she left, Ita left, an open-ended question, so we can leave the conversation also open-ended. And I would really urge all of you to pick up the book. It's a fantastic book. Thank you, Ita, and thank you, Arpita, for doing this session for us. It was delightful. We could have a peek. The others, I mean, we've had a look at the book. But the others, they could just have a little bit of idea about the book. And I hope we all read the book. And thank you once again. Do subscribe to our newsletter so that, I mean, we have a monthly event. We'll have another session on another book next month. So we'd like to have all of you again. And stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks,
also.
Sabha, for this. Thanks, Amir. Thanks for this space. These spaces are really important right now. Thank you.
And thank you to
Thank you.
everyone who's listened in today. It was really nice to see everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.